The Galactic Academy of Xenobiology, Orientation Day. Professor Zhuang tapped his four upper limbs together, a gesture of excitement among the Velhari people, as he watched 200 first-year students file into the Grand Lecture Dome of the Galactic Academy of Xenobiology. The dome itself was a marvel of Confederation engineering, its transparent ceiling revealing the gas giant Vethera swirling in magnificent purple and gold storms far below. Students from 37 known species settled into their gravity-adjusted seats, some floating slightly, others anchoring with adhesive pads, and a few, the Grethali, simply coiling themselves around the support pillars. This was Orientation Day. The day Professor Zhuang had been waiting for since he took the position 12 standard cycles ago. Because today, for the very first time in the Academy's 400-year history, the curriculum had been officially updated to include a full dedicated module on the single most controversial, debated, and frankly terrifying subject in xenobiological sciences. Welcome, Zhuang said, his translator bead humming warmly at his throat. Welcome to Introduction to Xenobiology Cycle 412. I am Professor Zhuang, and I have been studying alien biospheres for over 60 standard years. In that time I have catalogued creatures from lava world Dreth, from the crushing deep of Mara's ocean moons, and from the crystalline wastelands of the null zone. He paused for effect. Nothing, and I want you to understand this clearly, nothing I have ever encountered in 6 decades of study has prepared me for the subject we begin today. A Sarati student in the front row raised one of her iridescent wings. Professor, is this the module on the humans? It is, Zhuang said. And before we begin, I want to address a common misconception. Many of you have heard the term, Deathworld. Some of you may think it is an exaggeration. A nickname given by dramatic traders. Perhaps a myth. He clicked his mandibles. It is not. It is a classification. A scientific designation. And Earth is the only Class Omega Deathworld with a spacefaring civilization currently active in the known galaxy. Silence fell across the dome. Even the low hum of environmental systems seemed to quiet. Zhuang activated the holographic projector at the room's center. A blue-green world appeared, impossibly beautiful from space, wrapped in swirling white clouds. Students leaned forward in their seats. The Velhari student beside the Sarati, a young male named Preth, stared at the rotating image with wide compound eyes. This, Zhuang said, is Earth. Third planet of a medium-sized yellow star called Sol. Surface temperature range, -89 degrees Celsius to over 56 degrees Celsius. The atmosphere contains 21% free oxygen, a highly reactive compound that causes slow combustion of most organic material upon extended exposure. The gravity is 1.0 standard, which sounds manageable, until you consider what kind of life that gravity produced. He advanced the hologram. The globe zoomed in, showing green continents and blue oceans. Then, slowly, creatures began to appear overlaid on the surface. The students had done their basic pre-reading, but seeing the scale representation made several of them shift uncomfortably. Earth's biosphere, Zhuang continued, evolved under conditions of constant, multi-directional threat. Unlike most inhabited worlds where apex predators occupy clean ecological niches, Earth developed overlapping layers of danger. Microbial threats. Macro-predators. Environmental extremes. Seasonal temperature swings of over 60 degrees in a single location. Electrical storms. Tectonic activity. Volcanic events. Ocean currents capable of capsizing structures the size of Confederation shuttles. Preth raised a limb. Professor, and the dominant species evolved in this environment? Evolved, thrived, and then, remarkably, got bored of the danger and started looking for more. Zhuang let the words settle. Humans are, by every objective xenobiological metric, the product of their world. They are dense with muscle fiber compared to equivalent mass species. Their skeletal structure is reinforced with calcium composites harder than the bone of most quadrupeds twice their size. They have a redundant circulatory system with the ability to reroute blood flow away from non-critical extremities during injury. Their immune response is so aggressive that it can be triggered by completely harmless substances. Their own bodies are constantly prepared for war. A Grethali student uncoiled slightly from their pillar. What about their psychology? Zhuang paused. He looked out at the assembled faces, curious, intelligent, young. He thought carefully about how to explain this part, because this was always the part that truly disturbed students. Humans, he said at last, regulate emotional stress through a process called play. As juveniles they simulate combat. They chase each other. They fall down. They are injured, minor injuries, and they get up and continue. They practice suffering as children so that, as adults, suffering becomes familiar rather than paralyzing. On most worlds, a creature injured in non-survival conditions would retreat to safety. Human children seek out the sensation voluntarily. The lecture dome was absolutely still. Furthermore, Zionich added, advancing the hologram to show a human face, round, soft-looking with forward-facing eyes and a slight curve at the mouth. They smile when they are happy. They also smile when they are threatening. They also smile when they are in pain and pretending to be fine. This expression, the same expression, serves three entirely different social and emotional functions. Xenopsychologists have spent decades mapping this. Preth stared at the human face on the hologram. The smile looked warm, friendly, completely unreadable. Tomorrow, Zionich said, we will discuss human history, specifically the wars they fought against each other before they ever left their planet. I recommend a full night's rest before that lecture. He paused. Some of my senior colleagues still have recurring sleep disruptions from studying that particular module. As the students filed out, Preth stayed behind, staring at the rotating blue-green globe. A Deathworld, the professor had said. The only class Omega in the known galaxy with a spacefaring species. He looked at the smiling human face still glowing in the air. It still looked friendly. That, he was beginning to understand, was perhaps the most alarming thing of all. The medical archives of Station Helix 9, the anatomy lesson. Dr. Vina Okafor was used to being stared at. She had been the only human stationed at Helix 9 for 3 standard years, and in that time she had grown accustomed to the mixture of fascination and barely concealed unease that her presence generated among the station's non-human staff. What she had not grown accustomed to was being put on display. This, said Dr. Yolf, a senior Confederation xenobiologist, gesturing at Vina like she was an exhibit, is Dr. Okafor. She has graciously agreed to assist with this year's Advanced Anatomy lecture series. He addressed the room of 30 resident medical students. You have all, by now, reviewed the theoretical files on human biology. Today we observe a living specimen. Vina raised one eyebrow. Specimen is a strong word, Yolf. He blinked his 4 eyes at her. Is it inaccurate? She considered this. No. Continue. Dr. Yolf turned back to his students. Human Dr. Okafor has agreed to demonstrate several biological anomalies that our files, frankly, fail to adequately contextualize. We will begin with thermoregulation. He gestured to a temperature display behind him. The current station temperature is 19 degrees Celsius. Dr. Okafor, how are you feeling? Fine, Vina said. The Sarati student to my left, Yolf continued, gesturing to a thin, winged figure who had pulled their thermal layer tight around themselves, is currently cold. Their metabolic baseline requires a minimum of 26 degrees for comfortable function. At 19 degrees, they are conserving energy and experiencing mild discomfort. He paused. The human finds 19 degrees comfortable. Now, Dr. Okafor, would you mind stepping outside briefly? An exterior access corridor was opened. The temperature reading dropped to -12 Celsius. The Sarati student made a sharp sound of distress. The Grethali sealed their outer membrane. Several others stepped backward instinctively. Vina walked into the corridor without her thermal layer. She stood there for 20 seconds, crossed her arms loosely and walked back. Her skin had gone slightly pinker. Her breath had produced a visible vapor cloud in the cold air. She was otherwise completely unchanged. Humans, Yalt said as his student stared, maintain internal temperature through multiple redundant mechanisms: shivering, vasoconstriction, metabolic acceleration, and subcutaneous fat distribution. They evolved on a planet where ambient temperature could kill an unprotected creature within hours, and they solved this problem by becoming their own heating system. He advanced to his next point: blood clotting. Vina, to her credit, had prepared for this part. She produced a small medical lancet and made a precise shallow cut on her left forearm, less than a centimeter, clinical depth. Several students leaned forward. Several leaned back. Note, Yalt said, the immediate vascular response. The human body detects the breach and begins clotting within seconds. Within 4 to 6 minutes, under normal conditions, the surface will be sealed. This is baseline human physiology, not enhanced medical treatment. You let that sit. The Confederation standard for equivalent cuts on Velhari physiology is 40 minutes, with coagulant assistance. 4 Grethali, 3 hours and external pressure application. That is not right, said a young Velhari student slowly. They seal in minutes? Naturally? The logic, Yalth explained, is evolutionary. An Earth predator that draws blood has, in most cases, only moments to complete its kill before the prey's body begins recovering. Many Earth prey animals evolved this rapid response precisely because their environment was full of creatures actively trying to end them. He turned back to Vina. The pain threshold, if you please. Vina had a data pad ready. She pulled up a comparative chart, stimulus response thresholds across a range of species. I'll summarize, she said. Humans experience pain in approximately the same intensity range as comparable species. The difference is behavioral response. In most species, a stimulus that registers as significant pain triggers retreat, stillness, or surrender behavior. In humans, it often triggers increased aggression. The room went quiet. Could you elaborate? Asked the Sarati student carefully. When I am hurt, Vina said simply, my first instinct is to find whatever hurt me and make sure it cannot do it again. She looked around the room. Is that not universal? The silence that followed was her answer. Yalth cleared his throat. There is also the matter of sleep deprivation tolerance, immune response aggressiveness, and the ability to function with injuries that would be fatal to most species. We will cover those in the next 3 sessions. He glanced at Vina. Thank you, Dr. Okafor. Any time, she said cheerfully. The students filed out slowly, casting looks over their shoulders. One paused, the Velhari youth who had spoken earlier. Dr. Okafor, he said carefully. Was it true? What the professor said about pain making you more aggressive? Vina smiled at him. Ask any human who's ever stubbed their toe in the dark. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked very quickly away. Vina looked down at her arm. The small cut had already clotted. She flexed her fingers, perfectly functional, and went back to work. Around her, Station Helix 9 continued its operations, full of species who had evolved in safer, kinder worlds. Species who had never had to become weapons just to survive their home planet. She hummed to herself as she walked. A cheerful Earth tune. The Grethali she passed in the corridor pressed themselves to the far wall as she went by. She didn't notice. She was thinking about lunch. The history archives of the Sethal Library, the war lesson. The Grand Sethal Library was the oldest repository of knowledge in the Confederation, a mountain of pale stone carved into a cliff face over 12,000 years ago, expanded and updated continuously ever since. Its vast reading halls smelled of ancient preservation chemicals and the particular dry stillness of information. Scholars from across the galaxy came here to study. It was a place of quiet contemplation and deep learning. Archivist Quellen had never expected it to also become a place of existential dread. It had begun 3 cycles ago when the library was formally tasked with curating and translating the full historical record of humanity for the Confederation's public access archives. The project had seemed simple enough. Humans had been part of the Confederation for 40 years. Their history was obviously available. It was simply a matter of translation and indexing. Quellen had assigned a team of 7 junior archivists to the task. 6 of them had requested reassignment within 1 cycle. Now Quellen ran the project herself, and she was beginning to understand why. Today she was presenting a summary to a visiting class of senior history students from the Academy of Sethal, advanced scholars, many of them working on doctoral-level theses about interstellar history. They were prepared, intelligent, and experienced with difficult historical content. She had personally reviewed the presentation 3 times before allowing it to proceed. What we are discussing today, she began, her voice carefully measured, is the human pre-spaceflight period. Specifically, the 2,000 years preceding their first contact with Confederation scouts. She activated the holographic display. I want to begin by establishing a baseline. How many of you are familiar with the Keth Wars? Several hands rose. The Keth Wars, fought between the Keth Empire and the early Confederation, had lasted 200 years and were considered the most destructive conflict in recorded galactic history. They had resulted in the loss of 4 planetary populations and the complete collapse of 3 star systems' ecospheres. The Keth Wars, Quellen said, involved approximately 42 recognized species across 9 sectors. They lasted 200 years. They are the single largest interspecies conflict on record. She paused. In the same 2,000-year period I just mentioned, humanity, a single species on a single planet, fought over 150 recognized large-scale wars. By some definitions of conflict, the number is closer to 300. The room was very still. I want to be precise about what I mean, Quellen continued. I do not mean skirmishes. I do not mean territorial disputes resolved through threat displays. I mean organized, industrial-scale violence between groups of humans, conducted with purpose-built weapons, lasting anywhere from weeks to decades, and resulting in casualties that, in at least 6 cases, numbered in the tens of millions. She advanced the hologram. In the single century preceding their first spaceflight, humanity lost approximately 80 million individuals to conflict. A young Velhari student raised a limb slowly. Professor, why? What were they fighting over? Quellen had rehearsed her answer to this question. She had rehearsed it many times. Everything, she said. Territory, resources, political ideology, religious belief, trade disputes, historical grievances, fear of other human groups who looked slightly different from them. She paused. What is most remarkable from a historical analysis perspective is not the frequency of human conflict. It is that, through all of it, they continued to develop technologically, culturally, and socially at the same time. While fighting wars of previously mentioned scale, they were simultaneously composing music, writing philosophical literature, developing medical science, and building institutions of learning. How? Asked another student. The current leading theory, Quellen said carefully, is that humans are psychologically capable of holding contradictory states simultaneously. They can, as a civilization, be simultaneously destroying and creating. Their history shows an unbroken pattern: war followed by reconstruction, followed by advancement, followed by conflict again. Each cycle tends to leave them stronger and more technologically capable than before. She looked around the room. The Confederation's most respected xenopsychologist, Dr. Mara of Andith, described it as follows: humans do not break under catastrophe. They adapt to it and then attempt to prevent it next time with varying success. A long silence followed. They fought themselves, the Velhari student said slowly, for thousands of years. And then they went to space. Correct. And when they arrived, they were peaceful? Notably so, Quellen agreed. First contact records indicate the Confederation scouts who encountered the early human deep space mission were prepared for hostility. The humans instead invited them aboard for a meal. She allowed a brief pause. The scout report filed afterward described the humans as warm, curious, and disarmingly casual about the entire situation of meeting alien life for the first time. The students stared at the hologram of the blue-green world, now marked with red lines indicating ancient conflict zones. Red covered nearly every continent. They went through all of that, he said quietly, and came out the other side wanting to make friends. Quellen nodded slowly. Which is, she said, either the most hopeful thing in xenobiological history or the most terrifying, depending on how long you think the cycle lasts before it starts again. The room stayed silent for a long time after that. Outside, the ancient stone of the library held its quiet, as it had for 12,000 years. Holding the records of 1,000 civilizations. None quite like this one. Aboard the research vessel Quiet Horizon, the field study. The research vessel Quiet Horizon was 4 days out from the Sol system, carrying a field study team of 12 students and 2 faculty supervisors, all bound for Earth's orbital station as part of the Academy's new xenobiology immersion program. Student Preth, the same young Velhari who had sat in Professor Zhuang's orientation lecture 8 months prior, stood at the observation window and watched the stars. He had studied. He had attended every lecture. He had read every file. Nothing had fully prepared him for actually going. The ship's human cultural liaison officer was a man named Marcus Webb. He was medium height, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of deep coastal wood and a habit of smiling in that multilayered human way, simultaneously warm and utterly opaque. He had been assigned to the Quiet Horizon specifically to ease the student group's transition to their Earth environment study. He was, Preth had decided after the first day, the most confusing individual he had ever encountered. On the second day of travel, Preth had found Marcus in the ship's small exercise room, engaging in what appeared to be voluntary combat with a mechanical apparatus. He was hitting a suspended padded unit repeatedly with his fists and elbows, producing sharp impacts that rang through the walls. He appeared to be thoroughly enjoying himself. "What are you doing?" Preth had asked. "Staying sharp," Marcus had replied cheerfully, not stopping. "Back home I do boxing. This is the closest approximation the ship has." He threw several more strikes. "Want to try?" Preth had declined politely. On the third day, a micrometeoroid cluster struck the ship's forward sensor array, causing a hull breach alert in the secondary monitoring station. The crew responded within standard procedure. Marcus, who had been eating at the time, put down his meal, calmly walked to the breach location. and spent 20 minutes in a pressure suit conducting repairs in the open space adjacent to the hull. He came back in, finished eating, and went to sleep. Preth had been watching from the doorway. "Does that not frighten you?" he asked when Marcus returned. Marcus considered this genuinely. The hull breach? No, it was minor. The suit was fine. He sat down. Should it have? You were exposed to hard vacuum. Separated from the ship interior by a standard-rated suit only. A single failure point. "I've done 3 EVAs this year," Marcus said. "The suit's good. I was fine." He looked at Preth with what seemed like genuine puzzlement. "You'd be worried about that?" "I would be," Preth confirmed, "extremely worried about that." Marcus thought about this for a moment. "Ha," he said. Then he went back to eating. On the 4th day, as the Sol system began to resolve in the forward windows, Professor Zewentich gathered the students for a pre-arrival briefing. Marcus sat at the back, half listening, half reviewing something on his personal device. Zewentich walked the students through protocols for Earth orbital station interaction, cultural etiquette considerations, and key behavioral observations to document. "You will notice," Zewentich said, "that human social interaction involves a great deal of physical contact. Handshakes, which are gripping of the hand, are a standard greeting. Some cultures use embraces. Do not be alarmed by this. It is friendly behavior." He paused. "Although I should note, the grip strength of even a non-physically trained human is approximately equivalent to the maximum effort grip of a trained Velhari athlete. If they shake your hand, they are not trying to hurt you." Preth looked at Marcus's hands. Large, relaxed, resting on the table. Marcus glanced up, caught Preth's gaze, and raised an eyebrow in the questioning way humans used. "Your grip," Preth said. "The professor says it is very strong." Marcus flexed his hand experimentally. "I guess? I never really think about it." "You do not think about it. Should I?" Preth didn't have an answer for that. The Sol system grew in the window. A yellow star, warm and medium bright by galactic standards, orbited by 8 planets. The third one was blue-green and achingly beautiful from space. It looked gentle. It looked welcoming. It looked like the kind of world where nothing bad could happen. Preth was 8 months past his orientation lecture now. He knew better. "Marcus," he said. "Yeah. When you think about Earth, when you think about home, what do you feel?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the star ahead. Then he smiled. "Not the threatening kind. Not the pain-masking kind. The third kind, the one that meant something real. Safe," he said simply. Preth looked at the Deathworld growing in the window. He thought about tectonic activity, predator evolution, reactive atmosphere, self-inflicted warfare, and a species that chose to box for fun. "Safe," he repeated slowly. "Home usually is," Marcus said. Preth was quiet for the rest of the approach. He was taking very careful notes. The Hall of Species, Earth Orbital Station Copernicus. The final lesson. Earth Orbital Station Copernicus had been built collaboratively by the Confederation and humanity 30 years ago, and it showed. The architecture was a beautiful fusion, Confederation efficiency and human aesthetic sense producing something that was both functional and genuinely beautiful. Wide windows in every public corridor showed the Earth below in constant, breathtaking rotation. Preth stood at one such window now, an hour after arrival, and could not stop staring. He had been to 3 other inhabited worlds during his academy studies. None of them looked like this. Other worlds were beautiful in alien ways, the crystalline orange plains of Mara's second moon, the deep bioluminescent forests of Grethel Prime. They were beautiful the way an art piece was beautiful. Earth from orbit was beautiful the way something alive was beautiful. The clouds moved. The oceans shifted color. The Terminator line, the slow division between day and night, crept across the surface with visible purpose. The whole planet seemed to breathe. It always does that to people the first time. Marcus had come to stand beside him. Even humans coming back from long postings. You look at it and something in you just settles. "It is very large," Preth said. 1.0 gravity, Marcus agreed with a slight smile. The field study group had spent the day touring the station's Hall of Species, a permanent exhibition dedicated to the peoples of the Confederation, part education center, part cultural exchange. The human wing occupied one full section, and it was there that Preth finally felt like the many lectures, files, and academic discussions over the past 8 months had started to resolve into something coherent. The exhibits were not about danger. They were not about weapons or warfare or biological resilience. They were about music, hundreds of thousands of years of music documented across every culture. About food, extraordinary variety, astonishing creativity, entire cuisines built around flavors and combinations that xenobiologists had initially classified as deliberately unpleasant before realizing they were missing the cultural context. About art, paintings and sculptures and performances and forms that had no direct translation in other species' aesthetics but communicated something unmistakable nonetheless. About family. About friendship. About the stories they told each other across generations. Professor Zunth had gathered the students in the exhibition's central atrium for their final discussion. A human guide, a young woman named Dr. Aisha Kemderim, stood with them, a xenobiologist herself, part of the station's cross-cultural education team. You have all, over this past cycle, studied humanity from a scientific perspective, Zunth said. You have studied their biology, their psychology, their history. You have been deliberately given the most challenging material first, because I believe in treating you as serious scientists who can process difficult truths. He looked around at his students. I want to hear now what conclusion you have reached. About this species. About this world. Preth spoke first. I think, he said slowly, that I have been learning about humans the wrong way. Zunth tilted his head. Explain. Every lecture began with what makes them dangerous. Their physical resilience. Their combat history. Their pain response. And all of that is true. All of it is real. Preth looked out the atrium window at the blue world below. But I think we started at the wrong end. The question is not, why are humans dangerous? The question is, what does it mean that something which came from that world, something shaped by that much difficulty and violence and hardship, chose as its first response to meeting us, to make friends? Dr. Nkemderim was smiling. The real kind. The Deathworld, Preth continued, did not produce monsters. It produced a species that knows exactly how bad things can get, and still chooses optimism. That has seen the worst of itself repeatedly and keeps trying to do better. That can hurt and keep going not because they don't feel it, but because they've decided the goal is worth the cost. He paused. I do not think Deathworld tells the whole story. The Sarati student spoke next. I think what frightened me most early in the cycle was the idea that they are dangerous. What I understand now is, they are dangerous in the way a tool is dangerous. The question is what they point that capability toward. She looked at Dr. Nkemderim. And in 40 years of Confederation membership, what have they pointed it toward? Mostly at helping, the young Velhari student from the front row, who had grown considerably since orientation day, said quietly. The first thing they did when they joined was volunteer for the Outer Rim medical program. Nobody asked them to. They just did it. Zunth was quiet for a long moment, looking at his students with something that might, in Velhari expression, have been pride. This, he said at last, is the truth about the death world that the classification does not tell you. Yes, Earth is a class Omega hazard environment. Yes, its dominant species carries biological and psychological adaptations that should, by any rational metric, have made them a civilization the Confederation feared. But evolution does not guarantee character. The death world made them strong. What they did with that strength, that was their own choice. He looked at Dr. Nkemderim. She gave him a small, warm nod. Class dismissed, Zunth said. You have 2 free hours before departure. I suggest you spend them at the viewing windows. The students scattered slowly. Preth stayed. He stood at the window for a long time, watching Earth turn below, real, enormous, beautiful, and alive in a way he had no adequate language for. Marcus came to stand beside him again. Neither of them said anything for a while. You know what's funny? Marcus said finally. We spend so much time worrying about how the galaxy sees us. Whether we scare people. Whether they'll ever really trust us. He was quiet for a moment. And then a group of alien students comes all this way to look at our planet from orbit, and that's the moment I stop worrying. Preth looked at him. Why? Marcus nodded at the window. At Earth. At the slowly turning blue-green world that had made his species everything it was. Because you keep coming back to look. That means something. Preth turned back to the window. Below them, the clouds moved over the oceans, and the Terminator line continued its patient, endless journey around the world that the galaxy called a death world. A death world. Yes. But also, undeniably, unmistakably, home. And the species that had come from it was out here now, among the stars, carrying all of that history and hardship and resilience forward into a future they were building alongside every other people they could find. Preth pressed his limb gently against the cold window glass. Below, the Earth kept turning. The stars kept watching. And the lesson at last was complete.